I'm not sure what she said, but I'm sure it was all good, right? Today I'm going to talk to you about what we see as digital health opportunities from the US side mainly. That's where I work, and although I write for the rest of the world, most of what I do is in the United States, so hopefully some of this will be applicable to you. This presentation and a whole bunch of other ones like it are available online. So if you just go to speakerdeck.com/SHAH, you'll see this presentation there and probably another 30 or 40 as well. If you are going to be tweeting, my Twitter handle is up in the top left corner of the presentation on each slide. And if you're going to do it in English, then you can use the hashtag HealthIT. And there's another hashtag called HIT, HITSM, which is the healthcare IT social media hashtag mostly for the US, but I'm sure that the rest of the world uses it as well. What I'd like to, this is just a quick intro about me, which you can read online. But what I'd like to talk about first is what is killing us these days most, because when we think about digital health, we shouldn't be writing software or creating systems that aren't focused on the real healthcare side of what we do. So if you think about, these are for the US, but it will probably be applicable to other European countries and probably to Turkey as well, is about 100 years ago, mostly infections used to kill us. And so healthcare was all about making sure that we didn't get infected, because once you got infected, you were pretty much gone. But nowadays, infections have been, in general, mostly what we call licked. We've got that in pretty good shape, Ebola and others not withstanding. What we have now are basically chronic conditions. Chronic conditions are those that just need to be taken care of regularly. And so when you think about digital health opportunities and what are the things that we should care about most, they should be focused on chronic conditions, care coordination, and related items. So the rest of this talk is really going to discuss what are the problems that we see in digital health with respect to chronic conditions, and what kind of systems, software, and other areas of concern could solve those. So if you think about what's killing us most these days, this graph is a good one that shows on the left-hand side what was the age group at which people died about 100 years ago. You pretty much had an equal chance of dying at any time. That's what the chart on the left shows. Now, though, we have more of a chance of dying when we're much, much older. That seems obvious, but when we're designing systems, we kind of forget that the highest needs for chronic care are not on the low end, they're on the high end, meaning as an age group, but the highest need for wellness and prevention are on the low end. And as systems engineers and folks who are building software, we need to recognize this for sure. So in the US, we're basically accepted, and many of you are from the pharma industry, so you'll like this, is that we cannot seem to cure things anymore. We only seem to take care of things now going forward. So if you think about the clinical model shifting away from curing a disease to caring for the disease, what are the things that we're looking for? We need to keep people out of hospitals because it's very, very expensive. So any technology that can be offering remote care or just keeping someone out of a hospital is a good thing. It's the one which is most expensive. If you can keep a person from going to their doctor, it's also good, because doctors are expensive and best to not be able to take them. If you can keep people off drugs, that's a good thing as well, because drugs too are expensive, but less so. And the main thing is that we want to keep people at home. So when you look at the digital health opportunities over the next 10 years, these are the 4 things that people are going to be focused on. Because we're a little bit further ahead with respect to digital health in some respects, those are on the your right-hand side, the things that we're focused on. And that is, number 1 is a successful transition in care. So most of our healthcare costs occur when people move from one place to another, from home to the hospital, hospital to doctor, doctor to doctor. So there's a lot of technology and other capabilities that we're building out that I think that folks in Turkey will be able to learn from and create as well. What this chart shows basically is that when you're designing digital health systems, we have to make sure that we accommodate the realities of the patient population. Patients are focused in two areas. One is people who are not sick, that's on the left-hand side. The people who are already sick, those are the ones on the right-hand side. So if you look at it, about a quarter of our cost, a quarter of our people, and about 4% of our cost is in the left-hand side. So you're well, you might be, and if we can keep you well, then our costs stay down. Later at risk, and then chronic care, and acute means you're in the hospital. In fact, some statistics say in the US and other European countries that the last week of care for a human being costs more than their entire lifetime if they've ended up in a hospital or some other environment. So those are the areas where digital health is mostly necessary, is to make sure that people don't end up on the right-hand side. They stay as long as possible on the left-hand side. So what's happening in the US is, and when you get this on your computer, you'll see it a little bit easier, is that we are moving from fee-for-service, which is in the US right now, every time a service is performed, a fee is paid, usually by insurance. Unlike here in Turkey, where most of your care could be provided by the government, all of our care is private and through private insurance. So this entire model of moving from multi-specialty into integrated healthcare systems and moving our IT systems, which I'll talk about in a minute, from just installing them. We used to, about 15 years ago, we didn't have much. Now we're at a point where many institutions have systems, but they don't know how to put that data together and do anything with it. So when you get this presentation afterwards and you're studying it, do pay special attention, because if you're in Turkey and you're making software that you maybe want to use in other places in Europe and the US, you have to match this specific environment. So what I want to talk about real briefly is about data. The biggest opportunity in digital health, and this is everywhere, this is global, certainly here as well, is in data comprehension. So we started on the left-hand side with mainly administrative data that we knew we had to keep for demographics, name, address, where you live, family history, those kind of things. So we moved from administrative to what's called phenotypic. Phenotypic means things that you can see about a person. So is the person sick? What is do they have a fever? What is their temperature? What are their lab values? Things like that. Moving then to bio-IT and genomics. So as you can see, we're getting more and more data, but the big question is, what does it all mean? How do I use it? So that's fundamentally the biggest issue today is we have a ton of data. I'm going to spend a little time on this slide, but really what we have is plenty of systems. So if you're thinking, okay, should I get into software? Should I get more data? Really, if you look at it, we have medical-specific hardware, Internet of Things sensors, consumer hardware like phones, et cetera, that's producing data. And we have a lot of software, right? There's almost no software that hasn't already been invented to take care of the data that we already know about today. New kinds of data will come out that is not available. But if you look at all of the things on the right-hand side, all the way from research data to pharma and clinical trials, payments management, care coordination, these things already exist. People are collecting data all the time. What they don't have is secondary aggregation, integration, and comprehension. So if you think about it, the integration here for tools, storage, services, science, and then key thing here is discovery, that the real value in digital health today is in understanding all of this data and then doing something with it. So that's where I'll spend a little time. But before I get there, let's just talk about what data can do, especially with many of you being from pharma. It's really, really important to see what's switching now. The way that we have data available changes the way that we do science. When all we had was a magnifying glass 100 years ago, one person could do one thing at a time, doing some research, et cetera. As we got more powerful microscopes, you still have one person doing something at a time, but they could look a little bit deeper. Now we have the ability, because of all of this data that's being collected, we now have the ability to put these things into what are called computable forms. And those computable forms can now be managed by by systems themselves. So on the left-hand side, you'll see that the traditional way of doing research, finding out what drugs are necessary, finding out what kind of treatments are good, et cetera, are done by saying, I'm going to identify a problem. I know about problem ABC, I know about a disease, and then I'm going to ask questions and say, okay, what can I find out about patients? I'm going to then collect all of this data, clinical trial, whether you're a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, whatever you're doing is simply trying to answer a hypothesis or a question that you have already formulated. So if your question was wrong, everything else is wrong after that. Then you spend millions of dollars, billions of dollars answering those questions with the data that's collected. But what I'm suggesting is that if we use all of this data on the right-hand side, all of this software now that goes into primary data collection through secondary aggregation, you can now think of new ways, and that is you identify data that's available, and there is plenty of it available. And to understand it and comprehend it, you can generate the questions. Actually, the computers themselves can figure out the patterns and generate some appropriate questions. Now, this is not all going to happen within a year or two. This is going to happen over decades because the way that we have done medical science for a couple hundred years is not going to change that rapidly. But as we start to look at what the power of digital health is, it's not that we can sell more drugs. It's that we can make the drugs better. It's not that we can get a person to a hospital because I can show them a map. It's to keep them out of the hospital. It's not that I can show them the doctor that is best for a particular treatment in a particular area, but it's best because I can keep them away from the doctor. It's not, digital health isn't great because I can do all of these things in institutions. They're great because I can keep people healthy. And that's really the key behind digital health is, it's not about the medical treatments afterwards, it's how do I keep people healthy so that I don't have to do any treatment on them. And that's what this is all about. So if I can identify data, generate questions, mine the data, now I'm not spending millions of dollars collecting it, I'm using data that's already there, I can then answer questions. So I can lower my costs, I can get to quicker hypotheses and I actually need less medical experience because computers will be able to manipulate that data much, much better. So when you're thinking about the future of digital health and what it can do for you, many of us think about what digital work has done in retail or for books, like when you digitize literature, it's not a big deal. It's not foundationally going to change the way any kind of science is done. But when we're thinking about digitizing medicine, biology, physics, chemistry, this is the big deal, right? So let's think about what we can get from digital health 10 years, 20 years from now that is completely different than what we're doing today, and then we'll see the power of it. So really what our customers are looking for, what governments are looking for, what hospital chains are looking for, what your customers, if you're in pharma or you're a provider or you're in government, are looking for is, why is the cost per patient per treatment going up and I don't know why? Why is this drug good in one human being but not so good in another human being? Right? So when we think about digital health and the opportunities, they are to answer these kind of questions. They are to answer the fundamental questions of how do I keep people healthy? And if I can't keep them healthy, what can I do to make sure that everyone's health is better over time, or the treatments work as well in one human being as they do in another? So let's not think about the fact that digital health gives us better marketing only, which it does and we should use it, but that it'll give us much more than that if we can keep people healthy. There's a lot of opportunity in health information networks. So as digital health grows, there's more and more networks being created. So if you're wondering where there's an opportunity for both pharma as well as providers as well as governments to play, it's starting to connect institution A with institution B with institution C so that they can use that data much, much better. The other big thing that you can think about is decentralization is happening, and there's a lot of opportunity there. It used to be that in order to take care of a patient, everybody had to come to one place. Now we're seeing that they're going outside, remote care, telemedicine, et cetera. So during the day, ask speakers questions like, okay, what can I do with this now that I have this here? And see what happens in retail clinics, like more and more work may be done in places where they were never done before, and that's what decentralization basically refers to. In the US, at least, more and more people are starting to pay for their healthcare outside of insurance. So there's a lot of payment changes going on that are offering new techniques and new technologies for digital health to apply that never did before. Now, there's a big shift in the way that we've done medicine just in the last few years alone. And this chart starts to talk about what those changes are. There's a huge opportunity in the way that we accommodate medicine, that we accommodate digital health, because now we're going from general wellness, trying to keep people well, all the way down to the hospital itself. Normally, in digital health or technology, we've primarily focused on this area here, but now we're talking about prevention, physiologics, which are, like Apple's new iPhone 6 and iOS 8 are going to have a built-in health kit component that gives us much more data than we had before. So the other opportunity is in externalization. As we move it from IT departments straight to patients, huge amounts of changes are occurring. If you think about this occurring where patients are now the focus, you can see that there's a lot of opportunity up in here. This is billions of dollars of opportunity in this top area. So what do we need here? We need more and more physiologics. So things that used to be done in hospitals can now be done at home. This is an area where we don't think about it, but especially those in pharma and those that are running labs should recognize there's a huge movement. In the US, this is a multi-billion-dollar market just by itself, are labs on a chip, where you can actually run blood tests or find out diagnostics quickly without having to go to a lab. So you can drop a specimen on a small device, and it can tell you things about that blood or about that specimen then and there, instead of waiting days and weeks. And again, you can think, the more physiologics we have, the more labs on a chip we have, the instant that we have data, the data problem isn't our issue anymore. Comprehending and understanding what it's all about is. Consumerization of monitoring. This is where Apple and Google, et cetera, are going to solve this problem. Don't try to go into this world, meaning this is not, the opportunity is not in hardware and it's not in here. What the opportunity is, though, is understanding all of that data. How can I go to HealthKit and how can I go to the data being collected by Google and Microsoft and others to put this together from a consumer perspective alongside the hospital perspective and see what I can prepare out of it. Diagnostic quality mHealth. So there's a bunch of data being generated. So I got physiologics, I generate data. I got personal genomics, and I got labs on a chip. I'm monitoring all of this. But what I really lack is, what is wrong with me, right? Patients don't need all that data. Doctors don't even need all that data. They just need to have you look at, put all of this data together, and produce some value that says, this is what's wrong with the patient. So the actual diagnosis itself, where physicians spend a lot of time instead of on treatments, is something that's very, very important to do. Predictive analytics. This is probably an area where when you think about comprehension and you say, what does comprehension really, really buy me? It allows me to predict and say, for example, we have in many hospitals, when a person comes into an emergency room, they have what's called an acuity score. You can figure out, you can take a little bit of data about what's wrong with them, a little bit of their history, and then you can predict what are the chances that they're going to get worse once they get into the hospital. If you knew the chance of how much worse they can get in the hospital, you may treat them differently than if you had no idea. So the more input we have in the data side, the more output we get in terms of scoring, in terms of understanding, and then predicting that a cancer patient has really 6 months to live versus 6 years, right? Those are the kind of things that are very, very important to do. Care team integration is a major problem because almost all medicine is complex. There's no scenario where a patient only deals with one person. So all of the data comprehension necessary to say I can connect you with one care team member to another is very, very important. And when you look at the care team integration and coordination, it's really, really tough. And it doesn't matter what country you're in, This is a massive problem, which means there's a massive opportunity. Lots and lots of money is about to be made in this area. And lastly, it's about automated diagnostics. So how many of you know about the IBM Watson computer? Just nobody here? If a few of you, definitely look this up, because when you have data, this is the future of what you can do in medical science. With that, I'd like to open up for any questions that you might have. My time is up. Everybody just agree with everything that I said? No disagreements at all? Come on, one person has to disagree. Any questions? Nope. All right, good. Well, I appreciate your time. Thank you.